The marble halls of the United Nations General Assembly have seen it all. Cold War standoffs, passionate pleas for peace, and the weary dance of diplomacy. But what was about to unfold was different. It wasn't a negotiation, it was a confrontation. It wasn't a debate, it was a duel. If you've ever felt like history is a one-sided story, a lie told by the victors, then this is the moment you've been waiting for. Before we dive into the heart of this geopolitical flashpoint, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. Give this video a thumbs up and let us know in the comments below, do you think history is a lie? Your engagement fuels us to bring you more stories like this. The air inside the chamber crackled, a static charge building with every word from the podium. Burkina Faso's president Ibrahim Traoré stood tall, a striking figure in his military fatigues, an intentional contrast to the sea of dark suits. His voice, steady but thunderous, cut through the tense silence. "You rewrite history," he declared, his gaze sweeping across the delegates, a challenge in his eyes. "You redraw our borders with no right. You flood our lands with debt and influence, then call it aid." Gasps cut through the delegates' ranks, rising like splinters. Several diplomats exchanged tight glances. This wasn't the polite, passive critique they were used to. This was a direct accusation, a public shaming on a global stage. Cameras shifted, zooming in not just on Traoré's determined eyes, but on a single American seated in the second row. Her name was Karoline Leavitt. She was not a diplomat, not a Secretary of State, but a young, rising press secretary. Yet every lens in the room seemed to find her. Wearing a fitted navy blazer with a thin gold cross resting over her collarbone, she didn't flinch. Her face gave away nothing, but her posture was a study in controlled intensity. She leaned forward slightly, elbows on her knees, eyes locked on the speaker, her fingers flexing as if they were counting the seconds to her turn. Traoré continued, his voice now a low growl. "You call us unstable. You sell arms to our enemies, and when we resist, you label us radical. No more. This is Africa speaking back." The room didn't explode with applause, but with a tense shifting, the kind of movement that happens when a fault line begins to crack beneath your feet. Behind her, a European delegate whispered, "He's not wrong." Another added, "America won't take that quietly." And she didn't. Karoline Leavitt stood. Her movement alone turned heads. Some delegates instinctively raised their phones, already sensing a viral moment. Her heels tapped the floor with a precision that was both confident and chilling. The tension didn't lessen. It thickened. As she reached the podium, the world held its breath, waiting for the counterstrike. She adjusted the microphone, a small, precise movement that seemed to calm the churning sea of tension in the chamber. "Mr. President," she began, her voice clear and without a hint of the thunder Traoré had just unleashed. "I respect your passion, but passion without precision is just noise." A collective intake of breath rippled through the delegates. This was not the polite diplomacy they were accustomed to. It was a verbal gauntlet being thrown. "Let's fix that," she said. Reaching into her briefcase, she pulled out a rolled-up document. It was old, yellowed, and frayed at the edges, a stark contrast to the sleek, modern technology of the UN hall. A hush fell over the chamber as she unrolled it and placed it flat on the podium. It was a hand-drawn map of West Africa, dated 1885. Gasps turned into murmurs as a delegate in the back whispered, "Is that Berlin Conference era?" Karoline nodded once, her eyes meeting Traoré's gaze across the room. "You're right," she said, her voice dropping slightly, now imbued with a somber gravity. "These lines were drawn without you, but they weren't drawn by me or by anyone alive today. They were drawn by European monarchs with imperial pens, and the rest of us inherited the wreckage." It was an admission that shocked the room. She was not denying the colonial past, but owning it, using it as a foundation for a new argument. The lights in the chamber seemed to dim, not literally, but symbolically, as Leavitt leaned into her rebuttal. Her fingers rested on the faded map like it was a sacred artifact, a piece of irrefutable evidence. "President Traoré, you are right to be angry. These lines were drawn in back rooms by men who never stepped foot on the land they divided." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "But here's where we part ways."
She lifted her gaze to the delegates. You say America benefits from a colonial legacy. I say we've spent the last century bleeding to fix what Europe broke. While your regime arms militias with Russian rockets, we build roads. While you threaten Western press, we defend it. Traoré raised an eyebrow, his lips pressed tight, but he didn't interrupt. The crowd shifted, this time more uncomfortably. A delegate from South Africa whispered, "She's walking a dangerous line." But Karoline didn't blink, her composure uncracked. She had just hijacked the debate, changing the narrative from one of historical blame to one of modern-day accountability. The map was no longer a symbol of colonial oppression, it was a prop in a new kind of war of words fought over who owns the present, not who owned the past.
You speak of corruption, Traoré said, standing again. His voice was calm, deliberate, a stark contrast to his earlier thunder. But your country backs regimes with oil, with rare earth minerals, while turning a blind eye to democracy. What do you call that? Karoline smiled, but without warmth. It was the kind of smile that warned, don't mistake civility for weakness. I call it reality, she replied, and I face it head-on, not by rewriting history, but by knowing it. She tapped the old map one more time. But history doesn't excuse tyranny, whether from a king, a colonizer, or a modern strongman. The room tensed again, and even Traoré looked caught off guard, not silenced but studied. Karoline's voice softened just slightly. I didn't bring this map to blame the past. I brought it to remind us how fragile borders are, and how dangerous it is when leaders redraw them with rage instead of reason. Her words hung in the air, a final punctuation mark before the room erupted. The silence was broken by the quiet fury of a delegate from Venezuela, who raised his placard. Is this now a platform for American political theater? He demanded, pointing directly at Karoline. Traoré leaned into his mic, a smooth smirk on his face. Exactly, he said. This chamber must not become an echo of old empires. The duel had begun in earnest. Then the unexpected happened. Germany's envoy, a measured woman in her 60s, requested the floor. I don't always agree with Miss Leavitt's methods, but today she raised a necessary point. Colonial legacy is real, but so is modern hypocrisy. The room froze. Even Karoline blinked, momentarily stunned by the unlikely support. But the heat wasn't over. A sharply dressed member of the African Union stood, his tone fire wrapped in velvet. We do not take lectures on governance from a country that allowed Flint, Ferguson, and January 6th to happen, Miss Leavitt. Check your own house. Karoline's response was instant, her voice lower now, controlled. That's fair, she conceded. America has flaws, deep ones. But acknowledging my country's sins doesn't mean excusing your own. We either hold everyone accountable or no one. Her words were met with a tense silence that was not applause but cold respect. The BBC stream flashed a new headline. Leavitt escalates UN debate. Accountability isn't selective. This wasn't just a political battle, it was a test of nerve. Traoré didn't flinch. He walked back to the center mic, his military jacket catching the light like steel. Let's start with the U.S., in Libya, in Iraq, in Africa, where aid comes with strings that tie our hands. He turned to face the audience, his eyes burning. She waves a constitution like it's sacred scripture, but where was that constitution when your CIA funded coups across the continent? The room murmured again, this time louder. Karoline stood slowly. No notes, just her voice. President Traoré, I don't deny history, but I won't let it be used to excuse present corruption or future violence. She stepped forward, her tone steady but charged. You want to talk about truth? Let's talk about real people. I met a Burkinabe refugee last year in Texas. His family fled not from colonizers, but from rebels backed by your inner circle.
The room stilled again. It was a direct, targeted strike. Traoré's eyes narrowed. "How convenient," he replied. "Your refugees' pain becomes your headline." But Karoline did something no one expected. She stepped away from the mic and walked to the central table, laying the map down again, this time facing the entire chamber. "This map doesn't lie," she said, her finger tapping Burkina Faso. "Neither do the satellite images. Aid trucks intercepted, rebels funded, civilians caught in the crossfire. We all have dirty hands, Mr. President, but only some of us are still pretending they're clean." For a moment, just one, Traoré said nothing. The chamber was as silent as a courtroom before a verdict.
As Karoline's final words settled into the chamber's heavy silence, murmurs swelled like an oncoming tide. Traoré returned to his delegation, where a flurry of whispered EULA and French broke out behind closed lips. One aide scribbled notes furiously. Another handed him a dossier labeled U.S. Historical Interventions. Karoline, meanwhile, kept her posture upright, eyes scanning the room like a hawk circling over unmapped terrain. She knew what was coming. The backlash always came. The fallout was immediate. Within hours, #Karoline versus Traoré was trending in over 20 countries. Fox News ran a headline, "Leavitt schools African leader with UN map drop." Meanwhile, Al Jazeera aired a special titled, "Power and Optics," when Western conservatives challenge African sovereignty. But the internet didn't wait for pundits. One clip of Karoline slamming the folded map on the podium racked up 3.4 million views in 2 hours. Comments ranged from outrage to admiration. She stood her ground like a lioness to, "Why is a MAGA spokesperson stirring up Africa's wounds?" Back in Washington, D.C., the reaction was more divided. The State Department issued a statement distancing itself from the event, calling Karoline's remarks not representative of U.S. diplomacy. A senior official anonymously told Politico, "She's not a diplomat, she's a spark plug, and she just lit a fuse in the UN." Karoline, however, wasn't backing down. In an impromptu press conference outside the U.S. mission, she stood in front of flashing cameras and declared, "The truth doesn't need a title to be spoken. I didn't come here to be diplomatic. I came here to be honest, and if that offends, maybe it needed to." When reporters shouted, "Do you regret confronting President Traoré?" she smiled faintly, "Only that I didn't do it sooner." Her phone buzzed a second later. A text from her team, "Fox wants you live tonight. CNN split. You're on every feed." By the next morning, the shockwaves had crossed oceans. President Ibrahim Traoré, back in Burkina Faso, stood behind his presidential podium, his jaw set. What Miss Leavitt said was not diplomacy, it was provocation, he declared in French to national media. "We do not answer to maps drawn by foreign hands. We answer to our people." His words echoed with national pride, but also pressure. Many saw Karoline's display as a direct challenge to the legitimacy of African sovereignty. But others in Africa took to social media in droves. A popular Togolese blogger tweeted, "Karoline Leavitt said the quiet part out loud, and maybe that's what we needed." Karoline returned to her hotel room in New York City. The adrenaline had faded, replaced by silence. She sat alone watching the news cycle spiral into a frenzy. Her team had prepped hits all day, but Karoline wasn't thinking strategy. She was thinking about her father. He had grown up believing the world changed through quiet work, not confrontation. As a veteran and civil servant, he respected diplomacy until he saw it fail. That night, Karoline called him. He answered with a grunt. "You all right?" She hesitated. "They're saying I went too far." He chuckled. "Good. That means you went far enough." Her shoulders relaxed. It was a reminder of who she was fighting for.
The London sky was a fitting gray, the BBC's studio colder than expected, but Karoline Leavitt felt no chill. The room was packed. African historians, European diplomats, British journalists. And seated directly across from her, a ghost in the machine, was President Ibrahim Traoré, unexpectedly present via a live satellite feed from Ouagadougou. The host gave a brief nod, and with it, the conversation began. Panelists spoke of reparations, French military presence, African sovereignty, and global hypocrisy. Karoline listened closely, jotting notes as Traoré gave a passionate account of Western manipulation in West Africa. But then the moderator turned to her. Ms. Leavitt, your map went viral. Some called it audacious, others said it dismissed centuries of pain. How do you respond? Karoline leaned forward, palms flat on the table, her voice calm and deliberate. If history hurts, we need to face it, not sanitize it. I didn't hold that map up to dismiss African pain. I held it to expose the geopolitical fingerprints still shaping that pain today. President Traoré, remote but commanding, cut in. You're an outsider speaking of wounds you do not carry. The West lectures us with charts while withholding justice. Karoline looked directly into the camera, meeting his gaze through the screen. Mr. President, I didn't lecture. I asked a question. Why are the countries most eager to call out colonialism silent when China builds debt traps in Africa today? Why is French withdrawal framed as freedom, while Russian arms deals go unchecked? The room tensed. The moderator shifted uneasily. Ms. Leavitt, are you suggesting Africa's current leadership is complicit? Karoline didn't blink. I'm suggesting the story of oppression didn't end with flags being lowered. New empires wear different suits. Some panelists applauded quietly. Others shook their heads. Traoré stared silently into the screen, offering no rebuttal this time. Outside, the BBC crowd buzzed. Piers Morgan tweeted, Karoline Leavitt just said what the UN wouldn't dare say in 5 decades. Backstage, her staff was on edge. You're not just in a debate anymore, her strategist warned. You're a symbol. Good, she whispered, a faint smile touching her lips. Now they're finally paying attention. She looked down at her notes. I didn't come here to flatter institutions or play polite politics. I came here to ask the questions no one else will. She knew her father, the veteran and civil servant, was watching. He taught her that truth, no matter how uncomfortable, was the only real currency. Colonialism wasn't just about flags on maps. It was about control over truth. And today, that control wears new clothes. Media narratives, diplomatic silence, economic manipulation. And if calling that out makes me controversial, then so be it. She looked at Traoré's face on the screen. The map I held up wasn't just paper. It was proof. And I'm not here to burn bridges. I'm here to light the path forward with truth, even if some can't handle the glare. And that's where the story stands. A political firebrand and a defiant president, each wielding a different version of the truth, have irrevocably changed the conversation about history, power, and accountability. It's a debate that's no longer confined to a single chamber or a single continent. The media war has officially erupted, and the world is now watching to see who wins. What did you think of this epic showdown? Was Karoline Leavitt right to challenge the narrative, or was she out of line? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this analysis and want to see more content like this, be sure to like this video, share it with your friends, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more stories that challenge the way you see the world.